Welcome to the second presentation of the library's, Friends of the Library's 2022 book Sandwiched In series. The Friends are famous for their book sales, but they do more than that. Stay with us following today's presentation for the Friends of the Library annual meeting to hear more about that. And please do stay on because we need a quorum. I'm Louise Richardson, chair of the Book Sandwiched In Selection Committee. I'd like to thank the other committee members for their good work this year. Margot Brown, Barbara Cook, Lisa Derrickson, Dusty Hewitt, and Pam Sonnefeld. This is our second year of presenting Book Sandwiched In exclusively via Zoom. We'd hope to return to in-person meetings this year, but COVID-19 continues to be in charge. Today's book, The Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osman, has been a runaway bestseller. If you haven't read it, there are 15 print copies in the library system, as well as ebook and audiobook versions. Today's presenter is Pam Walker. She's currently and contentedly retired, but has been a city and regional planner, was executive director of Literacy Volunteers of Central Southern Tier, and most recently an English language arts teacher at the Alternative School for Math and Science. When asked about interests or hobbies related to the book, she replied, "I'm not an amateur detective, but I've spent the last 10 years helping my parents transition into assisted living and navigating other aspects of the elder care system." We'll keep everyone muted during the presentation, but we'll open the mics afterwards, and we hope you'll have some comments and questions. You may also ask questions or make comments in the chat, and I'll be moderating that. Thanks so much for putting aside your Zoom fatigue to join us today. We hope to see you for the next 4 presentations as well for an interesting lineup of books and presenters. Thanks very much, and here's Pam.
Hey, thank you very much, Louise, for that introduction. I will remind you again, because I've had some experience with other Zoom meetings, that if your mic is not muted, would you please mute it now, or else you might find yourself taking over the screen, surprisingly. I will acknowledge too, Zoom fatigue is real. So thank you very much for coming today and for listening in to what I think was a review of what I think is a really great book. So I want to start off, though, by noting that what I understand of Book Sandwiched In is that most presenters are chosen because they have some connection to the novel. Like last week, the Reverend Gary McCaslin presented on the Children's Bible, and I know Pauline Emery has talked about the library book, and Mayor Bill Boland reviewed The President is Missing. So why me? What do I have to do with this book? I'm going to share my screen, and you might find that there's a little bit of a delay here. We have had some technical issues, but why me? What connection do I have to the Thursday Murder Club? It's a mystery, just like the book. But for one thing, the Thursday Murder Club takes place in British. I had to look up what a weald is and how to pronounce it. And in case you were wondering, right, south of London that separates that city from the English Channel coast. Aha. But then another thing, this book is about a group of octogenarians who live in a luxurious senior community and draw upon skills they developed in their former careers to solve a murder. Well, I'm recently retired, but I'm not 80 yet. And I don't know that much about geriatrics or assisted living, even though I've spent a lot of years frustrated by it. But I think I can see a useful connection. So I'm a retired middle school English language arts teacher, and one of my particular skills was helping students discover books they could read for pleasure and for deeper analysis. So bear with me, because what I'm going to do today is draw on the skills I developed in that career to show you why I enjoyed the Thursday Murder Club. And I say bear with me for good reason. I'm going to invite you into my virtual middle school classroom to see how I approach reading this book. So, welcome class. I'm Mrs. Walker and I love to read. So, how do I decide what to read? Well, I mentioned that I like to help students choose books they know they're going to love. And like many of you, I'm sure, I like to return to authors whose works I've enjoyed. And aside, it's amazing to me how many of my students got to 6th grade without knowing how to do this, or even having the experience of reading a complete chapter book. I think that's tragic. But back to the point, relying on a familiar author is no help to me here. I'd not read or even heard of Richard Osman, the author of the Thursday Murder Club, a first-time writer, but he's a fascinating character. He was born in Essex, England, and raised in Sussex. Osman studied at Cambridge's Trinity College. He's no slouch, and he began his career working in television, producing game shows. His credits include some shows whose names might be familiar to you: Whose Line Is It Anyway? And Deal or No Deal. He eventually moved out in front of the camera, and as a presenter of the quiz show called Pointless, he kind of made his mark. Osman's on-screen credits also include comedic appearances on a lot of panel shows, and his literary career seems headed for a similar success. The Thursday Murder Club is only his debut novel, the second in the series. The Man Who Died Twice is in bookstores now, and altogether, Osman plans on 4 installments. And movie fans will be interested to learn that Steven Spielberg has acquired the film rights to the Thursday Murder Club. So, how would a good analytical reader approach Osman's literary efforts? I'm going to give you a quick middle school appropriate lesson. And wait for it, it's coming. The wheel is spinning. And spinning some more. I hope it's coming.
If you want to stay relevant, gotta stick to the elements. If you want to get the story, then repeat these words for me. Exposition, rising action, then you got the climax. Falling action, resolution, go ahead and try that. Exposition, rising action, then you got the climax. Falling action, resolution, go ahead and try that. First comes the exposition, also called setting. No setup for the story, then we don't know where it's heading. Got to make clear where the story takes place. Introduce characters, just give you a taste. Introduce time and place, try to set the mood. For example, give the character a little attitude. Get to know a bit about the location before you get into the drama situation. Next is rising action, conflict is coming. Story started stable, now it's off and running. Rising action is the drama getting hot. It thickens up the story, it thickens up the plot. The plot is the events that make up a story. With no rising action, you know what's gonna bore me. The more conflict, the more intensity. I hear the hook calling my name. What's that you said for me? If you wanna stay relevant, gotta stick to the elements.
Okay, I'll move on. Whoa, I'm trying to move on. There we go. Thanks for bearing with me. I know that this isn't exactly the audience for a rap, but trust me, my students love that. So let's stick with the elements and start with the exposition and the setting before we get to the drama situation. I believe that the best books welcome you into the world of the story, which is what I like to call the setting for students who think that the setting only refers to a location, because the setting really includes the rules that govern life in the story world. It has to make sense. It has to feel realistic. And happily, Osman immerses us in a finely detailed, realistic, and just a little bit aspirational story world in Cooper's Chase, a senior community located in Kent. He introduces the setting in the second person as though we're setting off on a journey, which in a way we are. He writes, "If you are ever minded to take the A21 out of Fairhaven and head into the heart of the Kentish Weald, you'll eventually pass an old phone box still working on a sharp left-hand bend." We continue traveling past a pub called the Blue Dragon and across the Robertsmere. Osman tells us, officially, the Robertsmere is a river, but don't get confused and expect anything grand. His description is full of Britishisms, dappled hedgerows, car parks, and a residence bowling green. His setting's also a clearly post-Brexit Britain, as references to currency and a growing population of Polish tradesmen show. Narrowing his focus, Osman brings us to the retirement community of Cooper's Chase, around which the story centers. Cooper's Chase is billed as Britain's first luxury retirement village. It's definitely an amazing place with a contemporary upscale restaurant and residents who down several bottles of wine with lunch. The dining room isn't the only luxury feature. The west-facing wall of the main building has been removed and replaced with glass to allow a lovely view from the residents' swimming pool complex, complete with sauna and jacuzzi. Sign me up. Cooper's Chase centers on a historic convent that was originally home to the Sisters of the Holy Church, an order active in the middle 1800s that also established a charitable hospital, but closed in the 1980s. And this image is not the actual place, but it is a similar converted convent to retirement village. Anyway, as Osman informs us with humor that pervades his writing, the convent then simply became a waiting room for the adjacent historic cemetery, that is. And when the last nun passed away in 2005, the Catholic Church wasted no time in cashing in and selling it as a job lot. And what a job developer Ian Bentham has done with the grounds. In addition to the lavish independent apartment style units, there's a nursing center where the lights always seem dim, the sounds muted, and the residents peaceful. Cooper's Chase has clearly made Bentham a small fortune, and he's ready to begin work on another phase once he gets rid of the pesky historic cemetery. And he has to acquire the acreage he needs from a recalcitrant farmer. Bentham is confident he'll succeed by hook or by crook, and the emphasis here is on the crook. So that's the setting. What's next in the exposition of any good story? According to the video I showed you, it's the characters, and I'll give you just a little taste and a bit of the attitude they bring to the story. Joyce is the only character who speaks in the first person through the journal she writes. She was a nurse and new to Cooper's Chase. Her chapters are entries in her journal, so we see not only what she thinks, but how she thinks. She has a daughter named Joanna who runs a hedge fund in London, the complexities of which Joyce claims she doesn't quite understand. But her asides about Joanna show that she's more astute than her words indicate. Joyce is lonely. Joanna's money bought her a place in Cooper's Chase, but Joyce would much rather have Joanna's company. And Joyce worries about Joanna's choices. She doesn't approve of the boyfriend, and she wonders why someone with $1 million home needs a therapist. So actually, Joyce is really a clear-eyed skeptic. It is a pleasure to meet the other characters of Cooper's Chase through Joyce's eyes. And she describes her first encounter with Elizabeth, which is in the opening chapter of the book. I want to read a little bit of that to you. That gets us. I knew who she was, of course. Everybody here knows Elizabeth. She has one of the 3-bedroom flats in Larkin Court. It's the one on the corner with the decking. Also, I was on a quiz team once with Stephen, who for a number of reasons is Elizabeth's third husband. I was at lunch, this is 2 or 3 months ago, and it must have been a Monday because we were having shepherd's pie. Elizabeth said she could see that I was eating, but she wanted to ask me a question about knife wounds, if that wasn't inconvenient. I said, not at all, of course, please, or words to that effect. I won't always remember everything exactly. I might as well tell you that now. So she opened a manila folder, and I saw some typed sheets and the edges of what looked like old photographs. Then she was straight into it. Elizabeth asked me to imagine that a girl had been stabbed with a knife. I asked what sort of knife she had been stabbed with, and Elizabeth said probably just a normal kitchen knife, John Lewis or some such. She didn't say that, but that's what I pictured. Then she asked me to imagine this girl had been stabbed 3 or 4 times, just under the breastbone, in and out, very nasty, but without severing an artery. She was fairly quiet about the whole thing because people were eating, and she does have some boundaries. Elizabeth, of course, is the leader of the crew that forms the Thursday Murder Club. They got their start when Elizabeth's friend Penny, a former former inspector with the Kent Police brought out old unsolved murder files to review. A few more facts about Elizabeth. She wears tweeds, which make her look, in the words of one character, like the sort of teacher who terrifies you all year, but then gives you a grade A. Elizabeth describes herself as an acquired taste. We never quite see it confirmed, but it's pretty clear that Elizabeth was a career spy. As Joyce puts it, I'm not supposed to say what Elizabeth used to do for a living, even though she does go on about it herself at times. Suffice it to say, though, that murders and investigations and what have you wouldn't be unfamiliar work for her. Filling out this Scooby-Doo crew of octogenarian crime fighters are the scrappy Red Ron Ritchie and Ibrahim Arif. Ron is a notorious but aging former labor organizer and generally oppositional type who looks forward to causing a bit of trouble now and then, and never believes a single word anyone tells him. Nevertheless, he has a heart of gold, which is most apparent in his relationship with his son, Jason, a minor celebrity and former boxer. Ibrahim is a not-so-former psychiatrist who appears to be a math whiz. He plays bridge, rattles off metric English conversions at the drop of a hat, understands the latest technology, and isn't there always one of these characters in every investigative ensemble? And he still sees the occasional patient. He also reviews his own set of case files, mourning the patients he wasn't able to help. So while these are the major players in the Thursday Murder Club, I want to note that Osman populates the mystery with a complete village of supporting cast members. Police constables and shady criminal types, parking committees, shopkeepers, and clergy members fill out the story. These characters, too, are well-developed and fun to meet. I should also note that every one of the characters Osman creates has a secret sadness. It's one of the things that endears them to us and makes them sympathetic. I found myself rooting for each and every one of them to overcome their personal demons, even the ones who turned out to be bad guys in the end. There's a sense of gentle melancholy that permeates the story for everyone, a feeling that time is limited. It's a mood and a reality that we can all understand, and it actually is what, for me, saves the story from being too cartoonish. So now I've finished with the exposition. Spent a lot of time there, but that's important to understanding how the plot unfolds. So on to the rising action and the conflict in the story. After all, it's the plot that drives a good murder mystery, and this mystery has one that thickens throughout with conflicts galore. So let me share a few, and I should point out that I will have no spoilers in case you haven't finished the book yet. So number one, Elizabeth wants to honor her good friend Penny's memory by solving an old police case with the rest of the Thursday Murder Club, but a violent death in the present steals the club's attention and efforts. Number two, Ian Bentham wants to develop another phase of Cooper's Chase, but the residents object to his plans to dig up the historic cemetery next door, and he dies suddenly under suspicious circumstances. Definitely a conflict there for poor Ian. Number three, Ron wants to continue to enjoy the deep friendships he's made in the club and his relationship with his son Jason, but these are threatened when the police accuse Jason of murder. Number four, Joyce wants to hold on to the memory of her deceased husband, which she treasures. She also wants to live in the present, which includes chasing down a murderer and nurturing a budding romance with a possible suspect. And five, Ibrahim wants to atone for the troubled patients he failed to save in his practice by bringing a guilty party to justice. But bodies and suspects just keep piling up, literally. So clearly the conflicts are complex, and Osman makes them all the more so with his style of writing. So here's where I'm going to give you a couple of other middle school teacher recommendations. You need to be a steak reader, not a potato chip reader. Osman's writing is so entertaining that it's easy to fall into a mode of turning pages quickly to find out what's going to happen next, kind of like opening a bag of potato chips and mindlessly eating them one by one until you're finished. Don't do it. The plot points are finely detailed and you might miss something important. So instead, read as though you're eating a steak dinner, savoring each morsel slowly. Or if you're a vegetarian, imagine a portobello mushroom or a delicious salad. And while you're enjoying your dinner, I'd like you to practice what I used to call CSI reading. And I'm trying to get my slides to switch. There we go. Really, I didn't make this up just for the presentation. I taught my students to be good reading detectives. Whether you're reading a mystery or a work of literature, careful readers ask questions as they go and look for answers that confirm or change their thinking about the text. So why CSI? Because good readers collect evidence as they go to draw well-reasoned conclusions. But Osman is an author who doesn't always make this easy for us. And that's why it's really important to read closely. I'll give you an example. Police Constable Donna de Freitas, one of the side characters, has been unlucky in love. She left her job in London after a bad breakup, and we read about her efforts to get over it throughout the book. So when she finally does go on a date, I, for one, felt badly for her when I read at the start of chapter 36, quote, Donna can't believe she's already in bed at 9:45. She'd gone on a date because, frankly, it was about time. A man called Gregor had taken her to Zizi's, where he'd nibbled at a salad and talked her through his protein shake regimen for 90 minutes. It sounds simply awful. And a couple of paragraphs later, Donna's thoughts drifted back to her ex. Close to tears through boredom, Osman writes, Donna had wondered where Carl was this evening. And further along in the chapter, Donna had spent much of the evening surveying the dinner table, idly wondering how she would murder Gregor if she absolutely had to. She had settled on injecting a dough ball with cyanide, although she later realized that there was no way she would have got Gregor to eat a carb. I had to conclude that Gregor was a self-absorbed loser, and Donna had to cut the date short and go home to wallow in her post-breakup misery. But Osman surprised me. In the next paragraph, he writes, talking of Gregor, she hears the toilet flush. She slips her clothes back on, and as he comes out of the bathroom, she gives him a peck on the cheek. There's no way she's staying overnight in the room of a 28-year-old man who has two posters on his bedroom wall, one of the Dalai Lama and the other of a Ferrari. I am shocked. And I go back to reread, another recommended middle school reading strategy, to see if I missed any clues along the way. No, I didn't. Osman is relying on me to make a bad inference when he tells me Donna was in bed early. It seems she had a better time than I assumed she had. And that's not the only time Osman exercises the kind of writer's sleight of hand. He misleads with his implications and clues that demand a careful reader to stop and wonder, wait, what did he mean by that? Is there something I missed here? Amazed on my second through by how much I missed the first time I read the book. But it's all there. You can solve the mystery too if you're a careful and a clever reader. So please read closely, ask questions as you go. Even though my middle schoolers rolled their eyes at this advice, I enjoyed doing it tremendously in this book. But finally, for me, what makes the Thursday Murder Club a great read is something like that the video left out. It's the mystery posed in the plot is a romp, for sure. But what gives this book depth are the aha moments the characters experience and the advice they have for aging gracefully. A message about life written between the lines of a word and a piece of writing that's been made up. It's convenient then that Joyce gives in life, she writes, you have to learn them around with you. In the end, the members of, and that it's important to value your does, opportunity to escape. So I hope you'll read something to think about today. Thank you very much. And we can go to questions or discussion now. But in case there's nothing that you have to say, since I'm a good middle school teacher, I have a final project for people who are tuned in today. Should I go to final project, Louise?
Yeah, so any comments, questions? Okay.
All right. I'm going to share my screen again. Okay, here we go. And let me advance the slide. Oh, I see a couple of questions coming in.
Okay.
Or chats. You remember when I mentioned that Steven Spielberg has acquired the movie rights? Well, here's the assignment, or maybe the discussion topic for today. If you were the casting director for Spielberg's movie, who would you cast for the crime fighters in the Thursday Murder Club? I'll stop sharing so we can see faces a little more.
Come on, folks.
I see Judge as Elizabeth, for sure.
Okay. I was thinking Helen Mirren maybe, but Judi Dench does have the James Bond credits, definitely.
I like Helen Mirren for Joyce.
Great, yeah. Could see her there too.
Barb's reminding us, I think the first time most of us saw Helen Mirren was in Prime Suspect when she was a detective as Jane Tennyson. So that's a good one.
Any thoughts about the
Any
male?
thoughts about the male detectives?
Johnny Coltrane.
I also think
maybe Patrick Stewart
for
for
Ibrahim,
Ibrahim,
because he
plays
plays
such a
great
great or debonair.
Yeah, and Barbara said it's a fun read, a good escape, and it is if you're really sick and tired of the cold weather and COVID ruling your life. And you haven't read this, do it. It's entertaining and a lot of fun. And in the library system, and I think probably as an audiobook. Oh, she meant Robbie Coltrane. So he was Hagar and Harry Potter. I know who she means.
3 sequels, one in bookstore.
Anything else?
Well, I'll ask, as life themes,
Now.
for those of us who are reaching the octogenarian phase, does it give us hope?
Okay, great.
So if you didn't hear the question, someone who's in the room with us asked,
As life.
I think if you,
Who's in the room with us asked that way. I don't, we got a little echo in the room, but someone asked, for someone who's reaching the octogenarian age, does it give us hope? And I'd say absolutely, yes, it does. One of the things that so impressed me is how gentle these characters are with one another and how cognizant they are of the losses they're all experiencing, but how eager they are at the same time to really embrace life. I didn't mention it, but Elizabeth's friend Penny is in a pretty much she just lies in bed day in and day out, and her husband sits by her side every day, but they all go to visit her and tell her their stories of the day, and they really honor her memory in a way that's very sweet. And so they all look back with a little bit of melancholy, but they are absolutely thrilled to be doing the things they're doing. So, the theme that I mentioned of you're never too old to do what you love, they've absolutely embraced that in the story. It's very hopeful. Yep, somebody in the chat wrote that they've created their own family and support system. Absolutely. And their relationships with their children are really wonderful to see too.
So even though Elizabeth's husband, Stephen, is fading, he has some illness or dementia, the four main characters are so sharp. They're really inquisitive, and they create the Thursday Murder Club because they want to use their minds. They love to strategize and think together. They're really a great group. And even though they are surrounded by people who might be fading in ways of aging, they really portray some really sharp people.
Very definitely, yes. And they also recognize, I think, that people make assumptions about folks who are aging, and they trade on those assumptions to manipulate the system and get information that they're looking for in some very funny ways.
Anybody else? Oh, Nancy's saying so many red herrings, fun going down all the different paths to find surprise endings. Oh, Barb says, why do you, following up on Kathleen's point, which is the literary elements, why do you think only one part was in second person? And then Peggy says, please talk about the interactions with local police.
Okay. The question about the one part, why the other, maybe why the other characters are written in the third person is kind of how I interpret that question. The third person can be omniscient. So Joyce only knows what Joyce knows. And so when we see her perspective, it's very limited, but it gives us a lot of Joyce. I think what Osman does by putting the other characters in the third person is we have, more of the bird's eye view of everything that's going on. And we find out a little bit about what each of them are thinking, but we have to remember that that third person narrative isn't always a reliable one. And so that creates red herrings for us at the same time. So I think it's all part of weaving the mystery that Osman weaves and the complexity of the plot. Peggy's question about interactions with the local police. So the local police here are a big part of what's going on, and they always seem to be a step behind the Thursday Murder Club. But the Thursday Murder Club recognizes that they need access to information that the police have. So they befriend Police Constable Donna de Freitas and make her feel welcome. And they kind of play her off against her boss to some great comedic effect, but also in a very useful way for them as well. But they're all really sympathetic characters. I think I can't emphasize that enough, is that, with the exception of maybe one person who gets his just desserts, most of the characters are people you can really identify with and really enjoy. I think Osman does a great job of creating sympathetic characters, and the police here are no exception. Anything else?
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Pam. That was terrific. Actually, oh, yeah, sorry. When we were talking about what books to do, we try to have a mix of fiction, nonfiction, some serious things, some less serious things. And we wondered, well, is there enough there? But clearly there was plenty in this book. And it does offer a little bit lighter touch to the series. There are a couple of more serious ones coming up. So thank you so much. It was terrific. Thanks everybody for your participation. We will get started with the annual meeting in just a minute or two, so stay tuned.